Hi, welcome back. We're joined by Dave from mySociety. Hi Dave.
Hi Tom.
So Dave, tell us a little bit more about mySociety. What exactly is it that you guys do?
So mySociety is a civic tech organisation. It runs as a charity in the UK or broadly like an NGO. We've been around for about 12 years now, which is 2004, and we started with a mission to basically help people hold authority to account. And in effect that means building useful websites. So it started, for example, with Fax Your Representative. Quite a lot of the people watching us probably don't know what a fax is, but that has now grown into writetothem.com, which is a website which lets people write to their Member of Parliament. That seems like a simple thing to do, but it includes some interesting ideas about, does somebody know who their representative is, and do they know why they might want to write to them, and do they know how to write to them? So even something simple like that is how we can make things easier for citizens. We also run a website called fixmystreet.com, which helps people report problems in their communities, things like potholes and broken streetlights. And we run a Freedom of Information site to make it easy for people to make FOI requests. And perhaps one of the most interesting ones that I think we're going to talk about today is theyworkforyou.com, which is our UK parliamentary monitoring website. And some of the issues around that have been so successful that people around the world like to run similar projects, so we help them with that with our code and more recently our data.
So Dave, generally speaking, what is the background to open data? Where did the movement emerge from?
So coming at this from a computer scientist point of view, I see open data very strongly as being kind of in the shadow of open source as a movement. And if you look at a computer program in the classic way of seeing it as input, process, output, open source was about making the process, the program code, available for anyone to see, contribute to, making it available. So open data really follows in after that once the benefits of that approach had started to be seen, and the community around open source existed, then it's applying a similar principle to input, in that input, process, output method of looking at computing.
Cool. So Dave, what do you think is the next big thing for open data in the future? Where do you think things are going next?
Well, certainly in the world that we're operating in, there's no doubt that that will be the next big thing, with it being normal for governments to release their data as open data. The idea that they wouldn't should become unusual and wrong. This is partly the Open Government Partnership. OGP is a movement that's strongly behind this, and lots of nations have already signed up. So I think the thing that's going to change is it will become normal for data to be open, particularly governmental data, which is what we're talking about here. And secondary to that, I think it will become normal for journalists to cite their sources by including making it possible for people to see the data they're working with. We've already got good examples of that going on, groups like The Guardian and their data visualizations. It's normal now to be able to access the data they've used. So I think that the next big thing will become this becoming normal, so that the public understand that data is part of both services they're using and journalism about stories backed on data.
So Dave, could you tell us a little bit more about the benefits of open data for the economy, but also for society?
Well, certainly coming at it from a civic tech point of view, which is where I'm working, many of the services we provide wouldn't be possible without open data. So that's simple things like we need to know the boundary of the administrative area that somebody's in when they're reporting a problem to the council, so we know which council to report to, things like that. And the significance of that is these are things that the public, normal people, don't need to know about, cannot figure out because the data is obscure, but actually through a good service using open data, we can make that kind of thing easy.
So Dave, when did mySociety start using open data? Was this something it started using from the very beginning, or did open data become increasingly more important over time?
Right, so mySociety's first service was in 2004, was Fax Your Representative, which was an online service that lets people write to their MP. And the issue underlying this, so we know from research from the Hansard Society that about 75% of adults in the UK do not know who their MP is. So the problem that Fax Your Representative was really solving was letting people write to their representative by telling us their postcode, for example. From that we get the geolocation. From geolocation, if we have the boundary data for constituencies, we can determine who the MP is, and if we have the fax number to send the message to that MP to, then that is the chain that works. The open data in that is the two things. One is the geolocation, mapping a postcode to a point, which at the time in 2004 was not open data, and also the constituency boundaries, which was.
So Dave, what are the kinds of open data do you bring into mySociety?
So another field that we're active in is parliamentary monitoring. Technically, we operate in the UK as a PMO, a parliamentary monitoring organisation, because we run the website theyworkforyou.com. Now, that makes it easy for somebody, as I mentioned before, to find their MP. Put in their postcode, we will tell you who your MP is. This is an important thing because we know most UK adults actually can't name their MP. And we will show you their voting history, for example, which is broken down into issues. So did they vote strongly for or against the Iraq War? Where do they stand? Where has their voting record gone on gay rights, Badger Cull, things like this? And that's possible because we parse the output of Hansard through a project called Public Whip. And Hansard is the record of what happened in Parliament yesterday, which in the UK is published in the morning of the day after. Often it's increasingly structured data, but we parse that data and turn it into useful things. So another example of the open data that we're consuming is Hansard, the output of the activity of Parliament, which is text. A really good example of how that isn't the data you expect is that when a vote is taken in the UK Parliament, the politicians walk into a yes or a no room, and a teller on the door of each counts the number of people going into the room and records their name. So the actual vote is recorded as a list of names rather than a digital summary of numbers. It's not produced in that way. So there's an example of it's open data, but it needs processing in order to make it structured, which is then we do useful things with. And a really great example of how useful that can be is that once we have structured the data and presented it in an easy and accessible way, it means we also know who was speaking and what their history is. So, for example, if you are a special interest group that's interested in, for example, the badger cull or fox hunting or anything, you can ask us to send you an email based on keyword of whenever anything that you're interested in gets mentioned. And the reason I tell you this is because every morning we send in the region of 30,000 emails out to people who subscribe to this service. So that's an indication of how useful structured data is once you've made it available. And that's fundamentally possible because the output of Hansard is available under the Open Government Licence.
So Dave, what kind of sources of open data do you publish as an organisation? Is it as CSV files or APIs or something else?
So we have two examples of where we put data out. One is Mapit, which is a service we make available for somebody has a geolocation. We will give back all the areas that point falls within. And those areas, for example, could be administrative boundaries in the UK, constituencies or council regions, which we use in our services, but we also make that available as an API for people running similar projects. That API is free for charities, for running particularly campaigning groups who want to encourage people to write to their MP, for example, but also is available commercially as well on a license. So that's a classic API. We also run Mapit, a global Mapit, which is preloaded with all the administrative boundaries from the OpenStreetMap project. So that lets the similar functionality, makes it available for anyone in the world if the data is available on the OSM project. And the other project that I'm particularly involved with is Every Politician, which is a very ambitious project intending to publish, make data available on every national level politician in the world. And that's an interesting example because we don't have an API for that. This is a deliberate policy decision. We're making that data available as CSV, which in practical terms means a spreadsheet, and JSON, and also libraries for coders to use. But we don't make that available as an API, which is an interesting decision that we made.
What would the impact be if open data didn't exist for mySociety? What would happen if tomorrow open data ceased to be a thing? What impact would that have?
So it's an interesting question because it's not abstract. In 2004, when mySociety ran Factual Representative, the postcode to geocode data wasn't open. And in fact, there was an annual license, I think it was about £4,000, that had to be paid to the Royal Mail. And so what it meant in functional terms is that if open data wasn't available, it would be much more expensive to run these services. There's another slightly more scurrilous answer, is that quite often crowdsourcing is a way around some of this. So at the time when postcode data wasn't available, all that data that was needed, when I say it wasn't available as open data. What's really needed is from a postcode, what is the point, what is the lat long of that position? And that is something you can crowdsource. You can ask somebody to give you that data and build your own version of that database, which was going on at the time. So in the apocalyptic vision of open data suddenly being unavailable, the two solutions to an organisation like us would be to pay for it or to crowdsource it.
So is open data quality, especially from government departments, improving over time, or is it sometimes a little bit sketchy still?
It's worth mentioning that one of the things which is changing is that younger people, be a little cautious about saying digitally literate, but people who understand the value of this kind of thing are starting to have roles in government, both local government and national government. Even at the cabinet office level, some of this is understood. So I think we in the UK, we're definitely seeing over the years there's been a rapid improvement in the quality of the data. It's a shout out for the ONS, the Office of National Statistics, have done a great job on that as well, understanding that the quality of the data needs to be good for this to be worth doing. And the quality doesn't just mean the truthiness of the data or the timeliness of it, but also the usefulness of the formats and the ability to even find what you're looking for. All these things are improving, definitely.
So when you're starting to look at different external sources of other people's open data that you're going to bring inside the organisation, what kind of potential risks can emerge? So might there be issues with gross inaccuracies or licensing or anonymity of people? What kind of things do you have to carefully consider?
So I'll knock anonymity straight out the window with that one and saying, because we are collecting data on public servants, we're not expecting to have a problem publishing the names of those people. With regards to the accuracy, it's always a problem, and the nature of data is there can be mistakes as well as gaps as well. And perhaps a more challenging question is that at some level, when you are using official sources, sometimes there may be an issue about how honest those sources may be if there is an agenda behind the data that's being published. That hasn't been such a big issue yet while we're collecting data on who politicians are. But when we broaden our scope, which we're starting to do, into what they do, which is things like expense accounts, attendance records and voting records, then suddenly there's a potential agenda in the data that is being published from sources. So again, at this level, you have to start looking for assistance from local context experts to help tell you how good this data really is. I think our approach would generally be, you can overdo this, and if you worry about only having perfect data, you have no data. So the first thing is make it work, make it right, make it fast. That's roughly the computer science approach to this. And there's a huge risk of a chilling effect of only thinking you'll use perfect data. In fact, the Every Politician response to this is much better than that. Our data is very dynamic. We're changing it frequently every day. You're familiar with this because a similar thing happens on Wikipedia and Wikidata, is that actually if there is bad data, it gets fixed relatively quickly as the nature of the process. I should add as well that Every Politician isn't letting anyone edit the data. We collate from multiple sources, but every time a change comes through, our bot works hard, makes that data available as a pull request, and even analyzes that pull request and comments on the changes that it has made. It makes that summary for a human to make the decision about whether to not let the data through or not. But on one level, that human cannot be making a decision about the truthfulness of that data, because it might not even be in a language that they understand. We put the responsibility of the quality of the data, we push that upstream. That's the nature of being a collating point for this data. But pushing it upstream doesn't absolve the decision about whether or not it is a a good source.
What was the motivation? How did you decide what kind of open data to publish and why? So within mySociety, you've got access to loads of information. So how did you decide exactly which open data sources you were going to publish?
Well, specifically for the Every Politician project, there's a very real motivation for this, which is that the success of theyworkforyou.com in the UK, lots of people in other countries wanted to replicate that. And it turns out it's actually really quite hard, because you need the data, you need the activity of Parliament, and then you also need the combined skill sets of people who can understand what parliamentary language means, understand how to make that accessible and available to users, all kinds of complicated things. And so we started by building a platform to let people run it. And in fact, the simple example is Mzalendo in Kenya was a project that wanted to do a similar thing to They Work For You. We thought, great, Kenya's parliament is strongly based on the British system, so they should be able to use our code. And it quickly became clear that actually the difference is the amount of cultural specific stuff in the They Work For You code that was just relevant to the UK Parliament meant that the code base wasn't reusable. So we wrote a general platform that would in fact it still is running Mzalendo, which is the parliamentary monitoring site in Kenya. But again, it turned out that when we did that in other countries, actually the generality of code was not working for parliamentary monitoring. It's a much more complicated and national specific problem. And ultimately we ended up realizing that the most useful thing to do is, if you make the data available, then the local groups can write their own platforms using that data. And what generally happens, and now we're straying into the world of civic tech and the way that parliamentary monitoring organisations work, quite often those groups are funded by grants and staffed by volunteers. And both those things are a limited resource. So if you waste too much time in the setup, then you end up with a project running out of money, or worse, running out of the dev skills, which often is crucial to doing this, while they're still in the business about actually getting the data, rather than before they've actually built the business logic of what makes it a useful site locally. So the objective was very clearly about, if we solve the data problem, and so that people don't waste time getting data, hunting out the data, if we're doing that for them, and we make that data available in a consistent format, which for us is either CSV or the JSON in a Popolo, following the Popolo open format. Not only do they not have to worry about getting that data, they might help us get it, but anyone who's written any code that absorbs that data, that code is quite likely it's going to be reusable for them, because we are ensuring the consistency as well. So it's a very deliberate ploy that the Every Politician project is using the kind of sources that groups like us would be using, the official sites, the unofficial sites, Google spreadsheets, anywhere where we can get that data from, and making it available. And we're doing that because of that part of the business about running a parliamentary monitoring site is the same in every country. And by doing that and making it standard, we think we're helping seed groups like us all over the world.